Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with Toby Birch, who is a senior investment manager at Gower Financial Services. And we're going to take a look at what has happened so far during the first quarter of 2022. Just to remind you, all opinions are personal and no investment advice is being given. Good to see you, Toby.
Hello, Tony. It's come around quickly again.
It's frightening, isn't it?
Yeah.
I just don't know where time goes or anything like that, but there we are. We've certainly seen a lot of highs and lows in the market, and we're going to come on to some numbers in a moment. But if you'd gone away for your 3-month cruise, Toby, and came back, you went on the 1st of January and came back on the 1st of April, the numbers are basically the same. What they don't show is the roller coaster that occurred in the meantime.
That's right. I call it the Rumpelstiltskin effect, where you wake up and think, "Oh, nothing's changed." But yeah, it's been a tough few months, and I think Churchill once, or the saying's attributed to Churchill, that history is one damn thing after another. I feel like it is like wave after wave of something happening, and so I'm hoping the rest of the year will be nice and quiet.
I think you're right there. I mean, looking at the constituents that we normally look at, the FTSE 100, 3rd of January was 7505, 31st of March 7516, US Dow 3rd of Jan 36585, 31st of March 34678, and the Nikkei 4th of Jan 27787 and 27821 on the 31st of March. So yeah, I mean, it appears to have done nothing. But tell us how you coped with this Ukraine COVID situation, which has driven the markets up and down like a yo-yo.
Yeah, it has been a strange. I mean, the indices you mentioned there are more traditionally industrial style indices, like FTSE and Dow. Other markets like the Nasdaq, technology index, got pretty badly whacked in the first quarter, and some of the S&P 500 index in the States hasn't broken even yet. So it has been, very topsy-turvy. The other strange thing is that the sell-off occurred so quickly in January. It's pretty much the first trading day of the year. Everything slid. So I'm a little bit suspicious about what happened there, because all news about interest rates going up was already priced in. So I'm just wondering that if some information was fed to Wall Street insiders saying there's a big build-up going on, because intelligence services know what they know about troop build-ups. You've got communications traffic. So I was thinking, it just seemed very suspicious where the sell-off occurred. And then lo and behold, the day the war got announced, you went from a 3% loss on the Nasdaq in the morning to a 3% gain. So a 6% turnaround in the market on the day of an invasion is really weird. It just doesn't make sense.
It's crazy, isn't it? How much do you put this down to computers sort of creating stop loss situations as the market tumbles?
I mean, that has happened in the past, and I think whenever these things happen, journalists scrub around trying to find a justification for any move either way. But I do think the fact that normally you get lots of little indicators pinging away, what you call like fear warnings, and none of these were giving any indicational signal in January when this hit occurred. So it was very odd. I mean, the suspicious side of me says insiders were selling, and then they bought back the day the war was announced, and I haven't seen any better argument yet, to be honest.
They certainly did well on it, down 3, up 3. I mean,
just on the day.
Yeah.
So it is frustrating to see, because normal investors don't have this information, and we've just got to do what we can. But I'm actually quite positive on the outlook, but strange enough.
So are we in a bull or a bear situation, or have you got a different phrase that covers this sort of yo-yo, but on a level basis, quarter on quarter sort of thing?
Yeah. I mean, I keep using the phrase "Wall Street climbs a wall of worry," and I think this is very much the case now. We've seen extreme fear levels, at 15 out of 100. That's very much full-on fear mode. and that's a very positive backdrop because all the sellers are out in the market. The other interesting thing is that over the last 50 years, whenever you have interest rates going up, you often get very strong stock market rises in the meantime. Literally in a matter of months, you can get double-digit returns. So for me, I'm very much in bull mode, and I'm very positive about equities personally.
Yeah. So, and the definition of a bear market is one that continually goes down, presumably over a period of time.
Yeah, I mean, you get these silly definitions like journalists call down 10% is a correction and 20% a bear market. But by the time these things have happened, they're over pretty much.
Yeah, quite.
Then it goes up. So it's kind of it's a backward-looking phraseology. And if you've seen these sell-offs, then that's great. Got them out of the way.
Since we last spoke, the dreaded inflation word has come back into common parlance, and not looking too good in that department, is it, at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's always this thing that whatever's in the news or online is ancient history from a market point of view. So much of this is factored in beforehand, probably as early as last year, because no one believed the central banks talking about transitory inflation. It was nonsense, effectively. And now they're backpedaling, to say we shouldn't talk about transitory inflation. So it is here, but the interesting thing, again, using history as a guide, is that because debt levels are so high among governments, they may use a trick that was used after the Second World War called financial repression. And this is where you have inflation at a certain level, but you keep interest rates below inflation, and that's got a way of diluting debt. And it worked very well. It was applied for a decade, or pretty much, over 2 decades after the Second World War. And the level of debt compared to the economy certainly in the Western world, absolutely, slumped right down, and it was a great basis.
So at the present time, we've got Bank of England base rate of under 1% and a likely inflation rate of getting on towards 8% as the year goes by. That's a big margin compared with the past, isn't it?
It is. I think, and the difference between now and the 1980s is that back then the central banker called Volcker in the States absolutely jacked up interest rates to high teen levels to crush inflation. This time around, I think there'll be a more of a Goldilocks inflation rate where it's just right. So it'll still be above interest rates, but it won't be enough to kill consumers, which it's doing in the short term.
Yeah.
But even now we're seeing commodity prices come off quite significantly. So we'll have a much higher inflation rate than the past, but I don't think it'll get out of hand.
And do you see it actually coming back down to the 2% that the government of the Bank of England is supposed to, if he goes in excess of that, he's supposed to get in touch with the Treasury, isn't he?
I think, I mean, all these things have disappeared. Just letters to the Prime Minister, whatever they do. That'll fall to the wayside. I think 4 to 5% inflation rates are going to be more common in future, with interest rates of maybe like 2%. But I think there will be a margin of 2 to 1 inflation to interest rates, which will allow that debt to burn off. I mean, there are other ways of resetting debt, but they are effectively a full-on, I wouldn't say financial crisis, but it's a default effectively, which is not a great thing for Western governments to do.
So some people say that governments do well out of inflation. In other words, they can really improve their financial situation as a result of inflation. How do you see that as far as the current UK government borrowing requirement is concerned?
I mean, inflation really is a tax on savers. So whenever the governments are borrowing money, they're taking from investors and pension funds, and that money is being devalued over time. So there's no sort of constraint on them spending more and more over time. So inflation's an easy cop out, and it is theft of from consumers and savers. But that's just what governments are there to self-perpetuate and drag themselves along for decades until you have a revolution. So,
we sort of managed in the 70s and 80s, but crikey, some of those numbers then were eye-watering, weren't they? 20% inflation at one point, something like that.
You get up to all these are like the winter of discontent and the like. So I mean, things have changed a lot since the 70s.
Yeah.
And inflation and even energy prices will have less of an effect as they did there. But just going back to the UK government, their debt levels are 140% debt to GDP, and sorry, just over 100% debt to GDP, which is normally the tipping point. But in the States, you've got 140%, and in Japan at 250%.
Wow.
So they can kind of, as long as interest rates are low, they can just keep on printing money. And it reminds me of the game of Buckaroo, where you keep, piling on weight onto the donkey, and it goes, boom eventually. But bizarrely enough, Russia's got one of those prudent debt GDP ratios of just 20%. So
yeah,
it's interesting to
it's interesting stuff. There's no doubt about that. Do you think that the independence of the Bank of England is advantageous in these circumstances? Because that wasn't the case in the 1980s, was it?
Yeah, I mean, it's been through a full circle. So that went to full independence, and now they're not quite as independent as they were. I mean, too much emphasis is placed on central banks of fiddling with, quarter, half, 1% interest rate changes. It's just not enough to make a difference.
No.
I mean, it's more. We've talked before about this jawboning effect, from this biblical phrase of Samson, fighting off the hordes, and it's more about the power of the word to temper inflation, temper markets, and keep a lid on things.
Just as you thought COVID was under control, another variant emerges, and then of course we get this invasion of Ukraine, and that seems to be playing a major part in how matters in the world are proceeding at the moment.
Yeah, I think the unintended consequences are probably the biggest I'll see in my lifetime, because again, everyone slags off Putin and Russia, and it says how sort of evil and useless they are, but remember, their national game is chess, and these leaders, like Putin, are incredible strategists.
Yeah,
and you just can't afford to underestimate them. And all these phrases from The Art of War come to mind when underestimating the enemy. So one of the consequences I can see is that by forcing these sanctions and removing Russia from SWIFT, it's all of a sudden created a new oil market where you can buy oil without using dollars. And this is the entire basis since the 1970s, when America went off the gold standard, is that the likes of Saudi Arabia are forced to buy US government bonds with oil profits. And it's like a permanent loop of money going back into the States and back into the dollar. And this could be the kind of the break in that loop, which really could undermine America's power, or hegemony, as it's called. So it's these little unintended consequences you don't think about. And already, so it means that people can step away from the dollar as a means of transacting in commodities, and this is a massive change, biggest I've seen in my lifetime.
Putin wants to be paid in rubles. Where are the rubles?
Yeah, I mean, we can still transact. I mean, the SWIFT system is it's more of a symbolic thing of taking Russia off. You can still transact oil and gas, using rubles and now the euro as well. So Europe is still buying Russian energy. So even if there's a shortage of rubles as such, it's a bit like cryptocurrency. There may not be much of it, or might not have little access, but the price you have to pay to buy those rubles shoots up. In other words, the Russian currency becomes so strong that you've got to pay more dollars or more pounds.
Yeah.
And this interesting thing that the ruble devalued very quickly, and it shot straight back up. And the reason for this is that the Russians very cleverly sold all their US treasuries and accumulated gold instead. So bizarrely enough, they've become a de facto gold-backed currency, which is what the American dollar is supposed to be, or used to be. So it's like a game of chess where someone's got you in checkmate, and you think, how the hell did that happen?
Yeah.
And I think that's where we are. So I think possibly the whole Ukraine conflict could be smoke and mirrors to let this economic takeover take place. I know that's a very far-fetched claim to make, but when you're looking at the people who are great strategists, you don't just go route one. You put up a diversion, and then you go around the back. And if this happens, it means they played a blinder. It's quite incredible.
So I mean, obviously the Russians aren't doing as well as they'd hoped they'd do militarily in Ukraine, but you're saying essentially they'd pre-planned the finance side of it as well as the military side of it.
This may be the case because it's been pretty half-hearted. They've encircled the capital, but in troop numbers, it's a very small proportion of their overall military, and maybe they don't want to go very far. Maybe they're just happy to play a game and then back off and keep the Russian-speaking parts. Maybe that's been the game all along.
Yeah.
But
Ukraine's very important from the commodities point of view, isn't it? In terms of things like sunflower oil and wheat and everything like that. And presumably that's going to take a hit. In all probability, there's not the capacity in the world to make up for that deficit food-wise. So prices inevitably go up again.
That's right. We saw the wheat prices surge. But fortunately, I mean, it's like all these things that 1 minute you've got this soaring prices, the next minute they're off 25%, and same applies to oil. Obviously, wheat's come off by the same amount, but you're still left with a heavily embedded price hike. But we're definitely through the worst. And the good thing about commodities is that you get this substitution effect, or new crops come online or become available from elsewhere. But it's not a quick process. It'll take it, and it's easier for commodities like crops to bring on supplies. The harder part is oil. I mean, that's another story altogether.
Oil and gas, of course. And particularly as far as Europe and Germany are concerned.
Yeah, I put it down to this. I call it the cult of climate change, where there's an obsession of replacing fossil fuels, and what it's done is it's diverted investment into old-fashioned energy production, and lo and behold, you just can't click your fingers and bring on extra supplies. And the proportion of renewables that make up the energy supplies is pretty tiny globally. It's not so bad in the UK, for example, but Germany's again ditched nuclear power, which is it's absolutely it's absurd. But I do think there'll be a degree of realpolitik, as the Germans would say. My view is that you'll start to see these sort of small modular reactors come into play, and they can power cities. They could easily power the Channel Islands, and they're not like massive plants. It's like a nuclear
couple of football pitches, apparently. In terms of size.
And again, it uses less space than these solar panel farms and the like. So I'm quite confident that a fallback to nuclear will occur to regain some independence, because otherwise people are just going to get cold, and and this is what governments don't want, is food shortages and high energy costs, because it could lead to them getting the boot.
Continuing to look at the German gas situation and their repudiation of nuclear energy, that wasn't a very good move, was it, in retrospect? And Mrs. Merkel did that apparently to create a coalition to keep her in power with the Greens.
That's right. And President Trump warned her. He said, you can't depend on Russia for your energy, your gas needs, and look what's happened. So there's a lot of lessons here, a lot of red faces, but I'm not saying there'll be a full dash to renewables, because it just isn't the capacity. But hopefully we'll get some old-fashioned fossil fuels investments as well, because that's been lagging for years now.
Yeah. If they did turn the gas tap off as far as Russia's concerned, what happens to the Russian economy? Is that going to suffer, greatly? Or they seem to be wanting to do deals with China and India and places like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they can get lots of the suppliers can go elsewhere.
Yeah.
I mean, from their point of view, you mentioned earlier about their debt GDP ratio is pretty tiny, and it makes them a lot more resilient to economic shocks. And again, Europe's shooting itself in the foot, because they've banned sort of luxury good exports to Russia, and luxury goods is a big part of their economy. So I think what's going on is that Western countries are scrabbling around trying to take revenge and shooting themselves in the foot at the same time. And to go back to the art of war, I think it's a phrase of when seeking revenge, dig two graves.
Yeah,
It looks like
very appropriate. Yeah.
and it's reflected in the stock market. Europe's been one of the worst performers this year on the back of this.
Well, they've reopened their stock market on a limited basis, haven't they? Russia.
Yeah, you'll get some trading. Obviously, there's liquidity vanished, and everyone's trying to ditch any Russian holdings because it's just the trend in among Western fund managers to get rid of anything Russian. Although I believe Odie have just dipped their toes back into one of the commodity stocks,
right?
Because Russia is also a big producer of like nickel and the likes, which everyone needs for renewables. So it's one of these things where hopefully the sanctions will relax over time and get the normalized trading to a degree, but this will obviously be require some reversal of the military action or backing off out of Ukraine to a degree.
How did the City of London come to get all of this Russian money coming in from oligarchs, which is obviously, theft of a nation's assets, and they didn't get caught out on client due diligence? I don't get that.
Yeah, no, I've run money for oligarchs before. Some, one of whom was jailed by Putin, and the due diligence you do is enormous. You'd be surprised, but ultimately there are private banks were desperate for this kind of business, and if you look back at it, all this came about because the World Bank wanted Russia to privatize its companies, and the opportunists came in and hoovered up all these shares which have been given to the public. And obviously there's some government involvement as well. It's Abramovich didn't come from nothing just by luck. So these were the clients to have back in the day, and now they're having their assets confiscated. But I think, again, with a cool head, I think this asset confiscation's got repercussions for us in futures, because it's all very well saying tax the rich or take their assets, but this can be applied to other people. And you've seen President Biden come out with this so-called billionaire minimum income tax. It doesn't apply to billionaires; it applies to 100 million, and it's like income tax itself. The target gets lower and lower, and we all get caught by it. And that becomes a wealth tax. And this was the precursor to, if you go back 100 years to when Germany had hyperinflation. The Weimar Republic forced the public to give 10% of the assets to the government in return for a bond, and it was a form of confiscation, and that triggered the capital flight. And all this money printing was a symptom; it wasn't the cause of the devaluation. It was a loss of faith in government. So we could be looking at something similar again.
Yeah. Talking about taxes, we hear a lot of chat from various political parties in the UK about a windfall tax on the oil and gas producers. I can't recall that BP got any government help during the Deepwater Horizon incident. So I just don't really see how you can, make that one work. And the other thing, of course, is that all of the oil companies have been paying petroleum revenue tax for a long, long time, haven't they?
I mean, it's not very fair having this one-way street, because it's just political opportunism. Got petrol prices going up in spite of falling oil prices, and the government's taken a wedge of tax on that. And of course, it's always the way they won't blame themselves; they blame companies. And there's one way you want to, one thing that will stop infrastructure investment is by increasing the tax bill. It's pure political opportunism, and these people just think in such a short-term way. And for most government people, tax is the knee-jerk reaction to anything. If it's successful, tax it, and what I don't realise is that you're killing the goose that lays the golden egg.
Yeah, every time.
Tax forces money elsewhere, or forces investment elsewhere. So it's I hope just leave them alone and give them a chance to take advantage of the price rise to reinvest and bring some infrastructure online, because
I think taking Shell and BP, they are doing genuine investments into renewables and things like that. So because they've got to, haven't they?
Yeah, but it's just such a massive shortfall that you need a gentle. It's like a relay race. You need a gentle handover. At the moment that the baton's just been dropped, and that's it. You've got to try and pick up from the ground up. So I just wish we would be a little bit more sensible about this decarbonisation idea, because
It's got to be it's got to be a transition as opposed to a situation that occurs overnight, because it will never happen. It's simple as that.
That's right.
Now, this week we've heard that the government intend to privatise Channel 4. Got any views on that one?
It's kind of a strange one, because Channel 4 was brought about by Margaret Thatcher to give a bit of variety to the old channels, and it's one of these strange hybrid beasts that it's government owned but commercially funded. So I'm wondering in our own mind what the attraction is to buy this sort of company. I'm Discovery are interested apparently, but if you think about Channel 4, nothing jumps out in my mind which is terribly different from other channels. I mean, it used to be very good on news, but now all news is basically coordinated and censored. So I'd love to know what the angle is to promote it, because I can't see it myself.
No. Question is, will the buyer still want to do Come Dine With Me and 4 in a bed and things like that?
Well, I hope they keep that. Yeah.
Perhaps they'll have to make that a requirement of the deal. But I heard this morning ITV might be interested in it.
Okay. Fair enough.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would for market share. I'm not an insider on these things, and often you have companies owning several different brands.
Yeah.
Like, Unilever, they hold lots of different brands underneath one umbrella, so why not?
Yeah.
And hopefully they'll make a tie-up with another channel. At the moment, everything's sort of, as you know, veering off terrestrial and going to numerous things like Amazon Prime, and obviously Sky's been around a long time, Apple TV. So it's the population shifts. I mean, we might watch a lot of TV, but our kids and grandchildren probably don't look at mainstream TVs anymore much.
No, I think for a lot of youngsters it's the thing of the past almost, isn't it?
Yeah.
But there we are.
Sure.
Now, couldn't resist bringing in Elon Musk, the richest, somebody that's even richer than you.
Oh, I don't know.
At $267 billion.
Oh, it's only dollars. It's okay. Yeah.
But maybe I can't remember a time in history, although there is a gentleman at the end that we're going to mention, where you've had a situation where an entrepreneur has been able to effectively set up what appears to be a very effective car business in the form of Tesla, space exploration, and then of course he's just put $3 billion into Twitter. That's a bit of pocket money, presumably, for the week. and obviously, I hear he's now got on the board of Twitter and sees that as another way in which to spread his tentacles.
Yeah, I think Twitter's been very wise to put him on the board, because he's been very critical of them, because they're renowned for their censorship and using algorithms to push stories down out of the news they don't like. So it's like a high-tech version of Pravda, a Russian newspaper.
I've never heard that one.
I just made that in my head. But yeah, so I think it'd be very refreshing to have this, because I went off Twitter because I just find it so toxic, and it brings out the worst in me as well. And it'd be great to have it as back to its original idea of being a very sort of free and open way of exchanging information. And so I wish him all the best, and I hope he does take them over.
Well, he's got effectively 29% in it, hasn't he, or thereabouts?
I can't remember the figure off the top of my head, but it's enough, I think, to.
But that's enough to influence.
Yeah, and there will be a phase of with takeover rules about how much you can accumulate over time before officially declaring a takeover. But I mean, out of all the billionaires around, I think Elon Musk is probably the least harmful. There's other billionaires, doing the rounds, who've got ideas of changing the way we live and whether we like it or not, and bypassing democracy. Yeah. So I'd be more than happy to have him take over more.
So we look at it and we conclude by mentioning one famous trillionaire, Genghis Khan. And in today's money, his fortune would be worth $120 trillion. That's incredible, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it turns out how you define wealth as well, because although the Queen on paper's only worth $500 million. I mean, if you defined her land as being her dominions as being her possession, then obviously she'd be up there as well. But Genghis Khan's an interesting guy because he's got this reputation of butchering his way through in his conquest. But I think 1 in 200 men are now his descendants.
Really?
So he wasn't just about killing people; he was about reproducing the population as well. So he was pretty prolific.
That's called engineering, isn't it?
That's right. Genetic engineering.
Genetic engineering.
But he was quite smart because he was illiterate himself. But he was a great leader. I remember seeing on a documentary that again, this memory's just popping out. But to unify his warriors, he took out an arrow and broke it over his knee.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, as individuals, we're weak. And he took 5 arrows and he couldn't break it. He said, together we're strong.
Yeah.
And so even though he's illiterate, he used what was around him. So one of the first conquests was China, and he used their communications and Mandarin bureaucracy to great effect. So as he expanded towards the West, out to, I think he got around to Hungary and maybe a bit further, had a very effective communications and high-speed messaging system on using horses. So yeah, it wasn't all bad. It was pretty brutal when you had your first encounter. But after that, he was quite an administrator, and also got Kublai Khan was his grandson. So person of great great civilization. Interesting. What's money going to be worth in the future, and what's going to happen to the financial system if we have these big resets going on and changes being touted about how bond markets and currency is going to work in the future. I mean, you talk about central bank digital currencies. This is another major change that could be coming, which could control how you spend your money and attach your spending ability to your social credit score, like in China. So there's a great undercurrent of using technology to create a sort of totalitarian regime consistently across the West. So these are very bizarre times. So I'm hoping for the best that the bad guys aren't infiltrating governments and institutions to push this agenda, that we all need to have this great new vision of how to live and sort of build back better. I want to put it back the way it was. Thank you very much.
That's
some old fashioned.
So we'll be having another look at it in July.
Yes, and hopefully I don't wish to I don't want to live in interesting times, as the Chinese say. I want a bit of quiet and peace. Hopefully rising stock markets.
Toby, as ever, thanks ever so. Really good to talk to you. You know that, and we know that a lot of our viewers like to have your views. So there we are. So see you in July.
Inshallah, God willing. Thank you, Tony.
Thanks ever so.